Millionaire CEO spills coffee on the table every day and humiliates her gardener until. Before we dive in, whether you're having your morning coffee or winding down for the night, you're exactly where you need to be. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Morrison Industries' 42nd floor, as Victoria Morrison, 27 and worth $200 million, stood behind her mahogany desk like a queen surveying her empire. Her emerald eyes, cold as winter frost, watched the morning chaos unfold in downtown Chicago below. The youngest female CEO in Fortune 500 history had built her tech empire through ruthless precision. And today would be no different. "Ms. Morrison, your 9 o'clock is here." Her assistant Jennifer's voice crackled through the intercom, barely masking her nervousness. Victoria had fired 3 assistants this month alone. "Send them in," Victoria commanded, not looking away from the window. Her perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the glass, as she mentally prepared for another day of conquering competitors and crushing obstacles. Success had always come easy to her, graduating Harvard at 22, launching her AI software company at 23, going public at 25. But personal connections, those remained foreign territory. At exactly 8:47 a.m., the sound she'd grown to despise echoed through her office. The soft squeak of wheels on marble, the gentle splash of liquid, and then the inevitable crash. Her morning coffee, a precise blend of Colombian beans worth $40 per cup, splashed across her antique Persian rug in a brown catastrophe. "I'm so sorry, Miss Morrison," came the familiar deep voice, rough around the edges like sandpaper, but somehow warm. Thomas Williams, the night janitor, who somehow always managed to be cleaning her office during her morning arrival, knelt immediately to clean the mess. His weathered hands, strong from years of manual labor, moved efficiently with paper towels. Victoria's jaw clenched. This marked the 15th time in 3 weeks. "Do you enjoy destroying my property, Williams?" Her voice could freeze lava. "That rug costs more than your annual salary." Thomas looked up briefly, his dark brown eyes meeting hers for just a moment. At 34, his face carried lines that spoke of harder years, but something in those eyes flickered. Not fear, but something deeper. "No, Mum. It won't happen again." But it would happen again. Victoria knew it, and somehow, deep in her chest, where her heart should beat with compassion, she felt something stir, something she couldn't name and refused to acknowledge. The morning meeting dragged on endlessly. Victoria demolished 3 merger proposals with surgical precision, while her mind kept drifting to weathered hands and apologetic eyes. By lunch, she'd fired the department heads and approved a hostile takeover that would eliminate 500 jobs. Yet all she could think about was tomorrow's inevitable coffee catastrophe. 3 weeks later, Victoria Morrison's routine had become as predictable as sunrise. Arrive at 8:45 a.m. Watch Thomas Williams destroy her coffee at 8:47 a.m. Unleash her fury like a corporate hurricane. Then spend the rest of the day wondering why her chest felt hollow afterward. Today promised no difference as she stepped from her private elevator into the marble-floored executive suite. Thomas was already there, mopping the conference room with methodical precision. His faded uniform hung loose on his lean frame, and Victoria found herself noticing details she'd never seen before. The way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar, the careful attention he paid to corners others might miss, the quiet dignity with which he carried himself despite her daily verbal assaults. "Your coffee's getting cold," she announced coldly, settling behind her desk to watch the morning disaster unfold. But something was different today. Thomas moved more carefully, his weathered hands gripping the coffee cup like it contained liquid gold. Step by step, he navigated around the Persian rug, avoiding every wrinkle and fold that had previously caused his downfall. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as he successfully placed the steaming cup on her desk without a single drop spilled. "There you go, Miss Morrison," Thomas said quietly, his deep voice carrying an odd note of triumph. "Perfect temperature, just how you like it." Victoria stared at the cup, then at Thomas, then back at the cup. Something was wrong. Her daily ritual of righteous anger had been stolen, leaving her feeling strangely empty. "Thank you," she heard herself say, the words foreign on her tongue. Thomas's eyes widened slightly. In 3 years of working at Morrison Industries, he'd never heard those words from the Ice Queen herself. "You're welcome, ma'am." As he turned to leave, Victoria noticed something that made her heart skip. A small photograph tucked into his shirt pocket. A little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, maybe 6 years old. The child looked exactly like Thomas, same warm brown eyes, same gentle smile. Williams, wait, Victoria called out. Surprising herself, Thomas stopped, shoulders tensing as if expecting another verbal lashing. Who's the little girl? For the first time ever, Thomas smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face from tired janitor to proud father. That's my daughter, Emma. She's 7 years old, smartest kid in her second grade class. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest. Where's her mother? The smile faded slightly. Cancer took her 2 years ago. It's just Emma and me now. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Here was a man raising a child alone, working night shifts to make ends meet, and she'd been treating him like dirt beneath her designer shoes. Heat flooded her cheeks, not anger this time, but something far more uncomfortable, shame. Victoria Morrison couldn't concentrate. For the first time in her career, quarterly reports sat untouched on her desk while she stared out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about weathered hands and a gap-toothed little girl named Emma. 3 days had passed since Thomas had successfully delivered her coffee without incident, and the absence of their daily disaster felt like missing a heartbeat. She'd done something unprecedented, research, not corporate espionage or market analysis, but human research. Thomas Williams, age 34, employed by Morrison Industries for 3 years, widowed father working double shifts between her building and a downtown hotel. No disciplinary actions, consistently rated excellent by supervisors, yet somehow, he always managed to spill her coffee. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Morrison, the Patterson merger documents are ready for review. Not now. Jennifer, Victoria snapped, then caught herself. When had she started softening? Reschedule everything until this afternoon, at exactly 8:47 a.m. the next morning. Victoria positioned herself where she could watch Thomas's approach. This time, she observed with the analytical mind that had made her millions. His path from the supply closet to her desk required navigating around 3 furniture pieces and across the Persian rug. But today, something was different. As Thomas rounded the corner near her bookshelf, Victoria saw it, a loose marble tile that shifted slightly under his weight, just enough to throw off his balance. For 3 weeks, she blamed his clumsiness when the building's own foundation had been sabotaging him. Careful of that tile, she called out, her voice gentler than usual. Thomas paused, surprised by the warning. Thank you, Miss Morrison. He adjusted his path slightly, avoiding the loose marble entirely. Another perfect coffee delivery, Thomas, Victoria said, using his first name for the first time. The sound felt strained on her lips, more personal than she'd ever allowed herself to be with an employee. How long have you known about that loose towel? His shoulders sagged slightly. About 3 years. Ma'am, since I started working here. Then why didn't you avoid it before? Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his callous fingers adjusting Emma's photograph in his pocket. Because you needed someone to be angry at, and I figured better me than someone who couldn't handle it. The words struck Victoria like lightning. This man had been deliberately absorbing her rage, playing the role of incompetent employee to give her an outlet for whatever fury drove her. He'd sacrificed his dignity daily to protect others from her wrath. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, she whispered, but her voice cracked on the last word. Maybe so, Thomas replied, meeting her eyes with quiet strength. But Emma's got food on the table and a roof over her head. Sometimes a man's got to do what's necessary. As Thomas left her office, Victoria Morrison, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, put her head in her hands and cried for the first time in 15 years. The revelation about Thomas's deliberate coffee spills haunted Victoria Morrison. Through a sleepless night, she tossed in her silk sheets, staring at the ceiling of her penthouse apartment, replaying every cruel word she'd spoken to a man who'd been protecting her from herself. By dawn, she'd made a decision that terrified her more than any corporate boardroom battle. She was going to apologize. Victoria arrived at the office at 6 a.m., 2 hours early, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The night cleaning crew was finishing their shifts, and she found Thomas in the supply closet, carefully organizing mops and cleaning solutions with the same precision he brought to everything else. Thomas, she called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, surprise flickering across his weathered features. Miss Morrison, you're here early. Is everything all right? No, she said honestly. Everything is not all right. Victoria had rehearsed this moment 100 times during her sleepless night, but standing here in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a janitor's closet, facing a man whose dignity she'd trampled daily, words failed her. How do you apologize for 3 weeks of deliberate cruelty? How do you explain that you'd used another human being as an emotional punching bag? I know about the tile, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you've been deliberately spilling my coffee. Thomas's shoulders straightened, preparing for another verbal assault. Yes, Mom. Why? The question came out more broken than she intended. Why would you let me treat you like that? For a moment, Thomas was quiet, his dark eyes studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. You want the honest truth, Miss Morrison, Victoria nodded, not trusting her voice. Because I've got a 7-year-old daughter who believes her daddy is a good man, and keeping that belief alive is worth more than my pride. His voice was steady, but Victoria caught the slight tremor in his hands. Besides, you reminded me of Emma when she has nightmares, all that anger and pain, looking for somewhere to go. The comparison hit Victoria like a physical blow. She, a grown woman, a CEO, a force of nature in the business world, reminded this gentleman of a frightened child. The truth of it stripped away every defense she'd ever built. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears threatening to spill. Thomas, I'm so incredibly sorry. Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a softening around his eyes. I know you are. How can you forgive me so easily? Thomas smiled then, the same warm smile she'd seen when he talked about Emma. Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. My wife taught me that before she passed. Victoria felt something break open in her chest, not the crack from before, but a complete shattering of walls she'd spent years building. Tell me about her. And there, in a janitor's closet at 6 in the morning, Thomas Williams began to tell Victoria Morrison about love. Her name was Sarah, Thomas said, settling onto an overturned bucket as Victoria sat across from him on a stack of paper towels, both of them seemingly oblivious to the absurdity of a billionaire CEO having an intimate conversation in a supply closet. We met at a diner where she waitressed while putting herself through nursing school. I was working construction then, barely making ends meet, but she saw something in me I didn't even know was there. Victoria found herself hanging on every word, fascinated by this glimpse into a world where love existed without stock portfolios or merger agreements. What did she see? Potential, I suppose. She used to say I had gentle hands for a construction worker. Thomas looked down at his weathered palms, scarred from years of manual labor. Sarah believed people were like diamonds. Sometimes you can't see the sparkle until you clean away the dirt. The metaphor hit uncomfortably close to home. Victoria wondered what kind of person she might be if someone had ever bothered to clean away her emotional dirt. How long were you married? 8 beautiful years. She fought the cancer for 2 of them. Never complained, never gave up hope. Even at the end, she was more worried about Emma and me than herself. Thomas's voice grew thick with emotion. The night before she died, Sarah made me promise something. What? That I'd teach Emma to see the good in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. Especially then. Thomas met Victoria's eyes directly. She said the world had enough people tearing each other down, but not nearly enough building each other up. Victoria felt tears she'd held back for 15 years finally spill over. I've spent my entire adult life tearing people down. Maybe, Thomas said gently, but that doesn't mean you can't learn to build them up instead. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of early morning employees arriving. Victoria quickly wiped her eyes, suddenly aware that the CEO of Morrison Industries was sitting on the floor of a supply closet, crying with the janitor. But instead of embarrassment, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine human connection. Thomas, she said as they both stood to leave, would you like to have coffee sometime? Real coffee? Not the kind that gets spilled on Persian rugs. Thomas paused, clearly surprised by the invitation. Miss Morrison, I don't think that's appropriate. You're my boss, and you're not just anything, Victoria interrupted fiercely. You're one of the kindest, most decent people I've ever met. And my name is Victoria. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, a possibility, a spark of something neither had expected to find. Thomas smiled, the kind of smile that could light up rooms and heal broken hearts. I'd like that very much, Victoria. As they parted ways, Thomas to finish his shift, Victoria to pretend she could focus on quarterly reports. Both carried the same thought. Maybe sometimes the most unexpected encounters change everything. Neither could have predicted that in 3 days, Victoria's entire world would come crashing down, and Thomas Williams would be the only person standing between her and complete destruction. The coffee shop Victoria chose was a small, family-owned place called Emma's Corner Cafe. She'd found it online and selected it specifically for its name, though she hadn't told Thomas why. Sitting in a booth designed for normal people rather than corporate executives, she felt oddly vulnerable without her marble desk and floor-to-ceiling windows as armor. Thomas arrived exactly on time, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his janitor's uniform. Victoria was struck by how different he looked, younger somehow, more confident. When he smiled at her across the small table, her heart performed gymnastics she hadn't felt since high school. "This is strange," Victoria admitted, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "I haven't had a normal conversation with someone outside of business I honestly can't remember how long." "What do you do when you're not running a multi-billion-dollar empire?" Thomas asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. The question stopped Victoria cold. What did she do? Work consumed 18 hours of every day. The remaining 6 were split between sleeping and getting ready to work more. "I work," she said finally, the admission sounding pathetic even to her own ears. "That's not living, that's existing," Thomas said gently. "What did you love doing when you were little?" Victoria searched her memories. "Pushing past years of business school and corporate climbing, I used to paint," she said slowly, surprised by the memory surfacing. "Watercolors, mostly. My mother said it was a waste of time, so I stopped when I was 12. Do you still have any of your paintings?" "God, no. Mother threw them away when we moved to the bigger house, said they didn't match the new decor." Thomas's expression darkened slightly. "That's a shame. Art is the soul trying to speak. Your mother threw away pieces of your soul." The insight was so profound, so painfully accurate, that Victoria felt her chest tighten. "I never thought of it that way." "Emma loves to draw," Thomas said, pulling out his phone to show Victoria photos. "Look at this one she did last week. It's our apartment, but she added a garden and a swing set we don't actually have." Victoria studied the childish drawing, seeing the hope and dreams embedded in every crayon stroke. "She's imagining a better world." "Exactly. That's what art does. It shows us what could be, not just what is." Their conversation was interrupted by Victoria's phone buzzing insistently. She glanced at it and her blood ran cold. "I'm sorry. I have to take this." "Victoria Morrison," she answered professionally. "Miss Morrison, this is Detective Rodriguez with Chicago PD. We need you to come down to the station immediately. There's been a situation with your company's financial records. The world tilted sideways." "What kind of situation? We'll discuss it when you get here. But ma'am, you should know, we've issued a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement and fraud." Victoria's phone slipped from numb fingers, clattering onto the cafe table. Thomas immediately reached across to steady her as all color drained from her face. "Victoria, what's wrong?" "They're arresting me," she whispered, her voice hollow with shock. "Someone's framed me for embezzling from my own company," as sirens wailed in the distance. Growing closer with each passing second, Victoria Morrison realized that everything she built, everything she was about to be destroyed, and the only person who might believe in her innocence was a janitor she'd spent 3 weeks treating like dirt. Thomas squeezed her hand firmly. "Whatever happens, you're not facing this alone." The siren stopped outside the cafe. The Chicago Police Department's interrogation room was a far cry from Victoria Morrison's executive suite, under harsh fluorescent lighting that made her designer suit look cheap. She sat across from Detective Rodriguez, a weathered man with skeptical eyes and 20 years of experience dealing with white-collar criminals. "Let me get this straight," Rodriguez said, spreading financial documents across the metal table. $50 million disappeared from your company's accounts over the past 6 months, and you claim to know nothing about it. Victoria stared at the papers, her brilliant mind racing to process information that made no sense. The signatures were hers, the authorization codes correct. Even her personal access passwords had been used. Yet she had no memory of any of these transactions. "Detective, I built this company from nothing. Why would I steal from myself? Maybe because the IRS was closing in. Maybe because your lifestyle finally caught up with your actual liquid assets." Rodriguez leaned back, studying her with cold professionalism. $50 million is a lot of money to just disappear. "I want my lawyer," Victoria said. Though the words felt hollow, her corporate attorney handled mergers and acquisitions, not criminal defense. She'd never needed that kind of protection before. "Smart choice. You're going to need a good one." 3 hours later, Victoria sat in Cook County Jail's holding cell, still wearing her designer suit, but feeling more powerless than she ever had in her life. The irony wasn't lost on her. The woman who'd spent years wielding financial power as a weapon now faced losing everything to financial crime she didn't commit. Her bail hearing wasn't until Monday. 3 days away, 3 days to sit in a concrete box and watch her empire crumble on the news. Already, Morrison Industries stock had plummeted 40%. Board members were calling emergency meetings. Clients were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Morrison, a guard called out, "You have a visitor." Victoria's heart leaped, hoping for her attorney, maybe even a board member who believed in her innocence. Instead, she found Thomas Williams sitting in the visitor's room, still wearing his work clothes, Emma's photograph visible in his shirt pocket. "What are you doing here?" Victoria asked through the plexiglass barrier, speaking into the scratchy phone. "Same thing you'd do if someone you cared about was in trouble." Thomas replied simply, "I'm here." Victoria felt tears threaten again. "Thomas, you barely know me, and what you do know isn't exactly impressive. I treated you terribly for weeks." People aren't defined by their worst moments, Victoria. They're defined by what they do after those moments. Thomas leaned forward, his dark eyes intense with conviction. "I know you didn't steal that money. How can you be so sure?" Because the woman who cried in a supply closet over treating a janitor badly isn't capable of stealing $50 million. Because someone who chooses a coffee shop called Emma's Corner Cafe without knowing why has a heart that's trying to heal. Thomas pressed his palm against the glass. "And because I've spent 3 years watching you build something incredible, and you don't destroy what you love." Victoria placed her own palm against the glass, matching his gesture. "They have evidence, Thomas, signatures, passwords, everything points to me." "Then someone who knows you very well set you up. Someone with access to your personal information." Thomas's expression hardened. "Who has that kind of access to your life?" The question hit Victoria like a lightning bolt. Who indeed? Her assistant Jennifer knew her passwords. Her CFO Marcus had signature authority. Her lawyer Richard had access to everything. Even her board members could have. "Oh my God," Victoria whispered. The pieces suddenly clicking together. The Patterson merger. Someone wanted to stop it. What merger? 3 months ago, I started negotiating to acquire Patterson Technologies. It would have made Morrison Industries the largest AI software company in the world. But it would also have put several competitors out of business. Victoria's mind raced as connections formed. If I'm arrested for embezzlement, the merger dies, and my competitors survive. Thomas smiled. The first real smile she'd seen from him since her arrest. "There's the brilliant businesswoman I've been hearing about. Now we just need to prove it. Victoria, I told you, you're not facing this alone. Emma and we know what it's like to lose everything. But we also know that sometimes losing everything is how you find what really matters." As visiting time ended and they were forced to hang up their phones, Victoria realized something profound had happened. In the depths of her darkest hour, when her money and power meant nothing, she discovered something worth more than both. Someone who believed in her not because of what she owned, but because of who she was becoming. Thomas mouthed through the glass, "I'll find the truth." For the first time since her arrest, Victoria Morrison smiled. Thomas Williams had never felt more out of place than walking through the marble lobby of Morrison Industries at 2 a.m., wearing his janitor uniform but carrying himself with newfound purpose. The security guard, Mike, barely looked up from his magazine. "Working late again, Tommy," something like that, Thomas replied, his heart pounding as he headed for the executive elevator. He had every right to be here. Night janitors had access to all floors, but tonight he wasn't just cleaning. Tonight he was investigating. Victoria's office felt different without her commanding presence. Thomas moved carefully through the space, looking for anything that might explain how someone had framed her so perfectly. He'd spent the weekend researching embezzlement cases online at the public library, learning how electronic evidence could be manufactured and planted. The key was finding proof that someone else had accessed Victoria's computer systems. Thomas might not understand corporate finance, but he'd learned a lot about computers from helping Emma with her school projects. Modern systems kept logs of everything. You just had to know where to look. Victoria's computer was password protected, but Thomas remembered her mentioning during their coffee date that she used the same password for everything, a security mistake that might work in their favor. He tried several combinations before hitting on Morrison 20-5, the year she'd started her company plus her name. The screen unlocked, revealing a desktop organized with military precision. Thomas navigated to the financial software, looking for transaction logs. What he found made his blood run cold. Dozens of transfers, all bearing Victoria's electronic signature, all moving money to offshore accounts. But something was wrong with the timestamps. According to the logs, Victoria had authorized a $5 million transfer last Tuesday at 11:47 p.m. Thomas knew exactly where Victoria had been at that time, sitting in Emma's corner cafe, talking about her childhood paintings and looking more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. "Got you," he whispered. "Taking photos of the screen with his phone. I wouldn't do that if I were you." Thomas spun around to find Marcus Webb, Morrison Industry CFO, standing in the doorway. Even at 2:30 a.m., Marcus looked perfectly groomed, his silver hair styled and his suit pressed. But his eyes held a coldness that made Thomas's skin crawl. "Mr. Webb," Thomas said carefully, not moving away from the computer, "working late, apparently not as late as you. Tell me, Thomas, is it normal for janitors to access their CEO's personal computer?" Marcus stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "Or are you working for someone else now?" "I'm working for the truth," Thomas replied, surprising himself with his steady voice. "Victoria didn't steal that money, and you know it." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Victoria Morrison is exactly where she belongs, behind bars, paying for years of arrogance and treating people like dirt. Do you have any idea how many careers she's destroyed? How many people she's humiliated? So you framed her. I saved this company from her ego." Marcus moved closer, and Thomas noticed the man's hands were shaking slightly. "The Patterson merger would have destroyed our culture, eliminated thousands of jobs. Victoria was so blinded by becoming the biggest that she couldn't see the damage she'd caused." Thomas felt a surge of anger. "So you decided to destroy her instead." "I decided to stop her. The money will be returned once she's out of the picture and the merger dies. Consider it a temporary loan for the greater good." $50 million is a temporary loan. Marcus's forehead cracked slightly. "You don't understand the complexities of corporate leadership. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made." Thomas thought about Emma, sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, trusting that her daddy would always do the right thing. He thought about Sarah's belief that people were diamonds who just needed the dirt cleaned away. And he thought about Victoria, sitting in a jail cell, believing herself abandoned by everyone who once feared her power. "You're wrong," Thomas said quietly. "The only difficult decision here is choosing to hurt an innocent person. And that's not difficult at all. It's just wrong." Marcus's expression hardened. "You're just a janitor, Williams. No one will believe you over me." "Maybe not," Thomas agreed, "but they'll believe this." Thomas held up his phone, showing that he'd been recording their entire conversation. Marcus's face went white as he realized his confession had been captured. "You have no idea what you've just done," Marcus whispered. "I've just saved the woman I love." Thomas replied, the words surprising them both with their truth. As Marcus lunged forward, Thomas was already moving toward the door, knowing that everything, Victoria's freedom, their future, even his own safety, now depended on getting this evidence to the right people. The Cook County Jail's payphone had seen better decades, but to Victoria Morrison, it represented her only lifeline to the outside world. At 6 a.m. Monday morning, 3 hours before her bail hearing, she dialed the number Thomas had left with the guards. "Thomas, thank God," she said when he answered, his voice thick with exhaustion. "Victoria, I have proof. Marcus Webb confessed to everything. I have it recorded." Thomas's words came in a rush of excitement and fear. "But we have a problem. He knows I have the evidence, and he's desperate." Victoria felt hope and terror war in her chest. "What do you mean desperate?" "He's been calling me all night, offering money, threatening my job, even making veiled threats about Emma." Thomas's voice hardened. "I've got Emma staying with my sister in Wisconsin until this is over." "Thomas, you can't get involved in this any deeper. If something happens to you or Emma because of me, nothing's going to happen, because we're going to stop him. Together." Thomas paused. "Victoria, I need you to know something. Last night, when Marcus asked why I was helping you, I told him it was because I love you." The words hit Victoria like a physical force. Love, a concept she'd filed away with other impractical emotions like art and dreams and happiness. Yet hearing Thomas say it, she felt something unlock in her chest that she'd kept chained for 15 years. "Thomas, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know that someone believes in you completely. Regardless of what happens today." Victoria wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I love you too," she whispered, the words foreign but true on her lips. I've never said that to anyone before. Then we're going to make sure you get the chance to say it again. 3 hours later, Victoria sat beside her hastily hired criminal defense attorney in Cook County's courtroom, watching her life's work be dissected in legal terminology. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with clinical precision, $50 million in transfers, all with Victoria's authorization, all moving money to accounts that benefited her personally. Your Honor, the prosecutor continued, Ms. Morrison has shown a pattern of treating her employees with contempt and running her company like a personal kingdom. This embezzlement is simply the logical conclusion of years of believing herself above the law. Victoria's attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Rodriguez, stood to respond. Your Honor, my client maintains her complete innocence. Furthermore, we have evidence that these charges are the result of a deliberate frame-up by the courtroom. Doors burst open, interrupting Catherine mid-sentence. Thomas Williams strode down the aisle, still wearing his work clothes, carrying a manila envelope and looking determined enough to stop traffic. Your Honor, Thomas called out, ignoring the bailiff moving to intercept him. I'd have evidence that proves Ms. Morrison's innocence. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and no patience for disruption, fixed Thomas with a stern glare. Sir, this is a bail hearing, not a trial. You cannot simply. Marcus Webb framed her, Thomas said loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. I have his confession recorded. The prosecutor shot to his feet. Objection. This is highly irregular, but Catherine Rodriguez was already moving. Your Honor, if this man has evidence relevant to my client's case, surely the court has an interest in hearing it. Victoria watched in amazement as Thomas, a man she'd once dismissed as merely a janitor, commanded the attention of an entire courtroom. When he met her eyes across the room, she saw not just love, but fierce determination to protect what mattered to him. The judge studied Thomas for a long moment, approached the bench. She said finally, all of you. As lawyers huddled with the judge, Victoria felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Not the calculated optimism of a business plan, but real hope based on something more powerful than money or influence. Hope based on love. 20 minutes later, the judge returned to her seat with an expression Victoria couldn't read. In light of new evidence presented to this court, I'm releasing Ms. Morrison on her own recognizance. Pending a full investigation of these allegations, the gavel fell, and Victoria Morrison was free, but more importantly, she was no longer alone. The FBI field office in downtown Chicago buzzed with activity as Agent Sarah Chen spread Thomas's recorded conversation across her desk. Victoria sat beside Thomas in uncomfortable plastic chairs, watching federal agents dissect the evidence that would either save her or destroy them both. This recording is good, Agent Chen said, replaying Marcus Webb's confession for the third time. But we need more than an audio file to build a federal case. Webb's attorney will argue coercion, manipulation, maybe even claim it's fabricated. Victoria felt her stomach drop. What else do you need? We need to catch him in the act. The money he stole hasn't been returned yet. It's sitting in those offshore accounts. If we can get him to access them while we're watching. Agent Chen looked between Victoria and Thomas. We need your help, whatever you need, Victoria said immediately. Agent Chen pulled out a small device about the size of a button. We want you to wear a wire and confront Webb directly, get him to confess again. But this time with FBI surveillance recording everything. Thomas leaned forward. Absolutely not. If Webb realizes she's wearing a wire, there's no telling what he might do. Mr. Williams, I understand your concern, but Ms. Morrison is our best chance to get close enough to Webb to gather the evidence we need. Victoria reached over and took Thomas's hand, feeling the calluses and strength that had become so precious to her. I have to do this, Thomas. It's the only way to clear my name and stop him from doing this to someone else. Victoria, I just found you. I can't lose you now. You won't lose me, Victoria said, bringing his hand to her lips and kissing his palm gently. I'm tougher than I look, remember. I didn't build a billion-dollar company by backing down from fights. Agent Chen outlined the plan. Victoria would call Marcus and arrange a meeting, claiming she wanted to negotiate a deal. Her resignation in exchange for the charges being dropped. The FBI would be listening to everything, recording evidence of Webb's guilt while positioning themselves to arrest him. The moment he implicated himself, what if he doesn't confess? Thomas asked. Then we proceed with the case we have, and hope a jury believes you're recording over his denials. Agent Chen replied honestly. But this is our best shot at getting him to reveal where the money is hidden and how he accessed Ms. Morrison's systems. 2 hours later, Victoria sat in her car outside Morrison Industries, wearing the FBI's wire and watching Thomas through her rearview mirror. He was positioned across the street with Agent Chen's team, close enough to help if things went wrong, but far enough away to avoid compromising the operation. Victoria's hands shook as she dialed Marcus's number. Everything she'd built, everything she'd lost, and everything she hoped to regain came down to the next few minutes. Marcus, it's Victoria. We need to talk. Victoria, how did you never mind? What do you want? I want to make a deal. Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. Come alone. The line went quiet for several seconds. What kind of deal? The kind where we both get what we want. 20 minutes. Marcus. Victoria hung up and checked her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who terrorized employees just weeks ago. This woman had learned about love and loss, about treating people with dignity, about finding strength in vulnerability. This woman was ready to fight for her future. As she walked into Morrison Industries for what might be the last time as a CEO, Victoria Morrison carried with her not just the FBI's wire, but something more powerful, the knowledge that someone loved her enough to risk everything for her freedom. Thomas Williams had taught her that some things were worth fighting for. Now it was time to fight. Victoria's executive office felt like a battlefield as she waited for Marcus Webb's arrival. Every familiar detail, the Persian rug where Thomas had spilled countless cups of coffee, the floor-to-ceiling windows that had once made her feel like a queen surveying her kingdom, now seemed like potential evidence in a federal case. The FBI's wire itched against her skin, a constant reminder that every word spoken in the next few minutes would either restore her freedom or condemn them both. Through her window, she could see the building across the street where Thomas waited with the federal agents. Probably pacing with worry, Marcus arrived exactly 20 minutes later, looking haggard despite his expensive suit. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his usually perfect silver hair showed signs of stress. He closed the office door behind him and studied Victoria with the wariness of a man who knew he was walking into a trap but couldn't resist the bait. You look terrible, Victoria observed, settling behind her desk and gesturing for him to sit across from her. Embezzling $50 million is stressful work, I imagine. Marcus remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. Careful, Victoria. You're still facing federal charges, am I? Victoria leaned back in her chair, projecting the confidence that had built her empire. Because I've been thinking about our little situation, and I have a proposition that might benefit us both. I'm listening. You want me gone so you can kill the Patterson merger and run Morrison Industries your way. Fine. I'll resign, dissolve the merger, and disappear quietly to some non-extradition country. Victoria watched Marcus's expression carefully. In exchange, you return the $50 million and provide evidence that clears me of all charges. Marcus actually laughed. And why would I trust you to keep that bargain? Because right now, we're both facing prison time. The FBI isn't just looking at embezzlement anymore. They're investigating conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering. If we go down together. Victoria leaned forward. But if we handle this smartly, we both walk away. You're bluffing. You built this company from nothing. You'd never just walk away. Victoria felt her heart crack slightly at the truth of his words. Morrison Industries was her life's work, her identity, her legacy. But sitting here now, thinking about Thomas's weathered hands and Emma's gap-toothed smile, she realized something profound. She was more than just her company. You're right. I wouldn't have before, Victoria said quietly. But I've learned recently that there are things more important than corporate empires. Things like love and family, and treating people with basic human dignity. Marcus's expression shifted, suspicion replacing confidence. You're different. What happened to the Ice Queen who used to terrorize this building? She met a janitor who taught her how to be human. The words hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than any merger agreement or financial statement ever could. Marcus studied Victoria's face as if seeing her for the first time. You're serious about this, he said finally. Dead serious. The question is whether you're smart enough to take the deal. Victoria stood, moving to the window and looking down at the street where Thomas waited. Or whether your ego is too big to accept that maybe you made a mistake. Marcus was quiet for several long minutes, and Victoria could practically hear him weighing his options. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. The money is in 3 accounts in the Cayman Islands. I have the access codes in my office safe. He paused. I never meant for it to go this far, Victoria. I just wanted to stop the merger. Make you reconsider the direction you were taking the company. Victoria turned back to face him, feeling a mixture of triumph and sadness. So you decided to destroy my life instead of just talking to me. Would you have listened? Really? Marcus met her eyes. When was the last time anyone in this building disagreed with you without facing consequences? The question hit home harder than Victoria expected. He was right. She created a culture of fear where honest feedback was impossible. But that didn't justify what he'd done. You're right about the old me, Victoria admitted. But the new me, she listens. She learns. She makes mistakes and apologizes for them. Marcus nodded slowly. Then maybe there's hope for all of us. Outside, FBI agents were already moving into position, having heard everything they needed to build their case. But Victoria felt something more important than vindication. She felt forgiveness, and the strength that came with it. Marcus, she said as they heard footsteps in the hallway, when this is all over, I hope you get help, real help. The office door burst open and Agent Chen entered with her team. As they began reading Marcus's rights, Victoria looked out the window and saw Thomas crossing the street, running toward the building, running toward her. 6 months later, Victoria Morrison stood in the kitchen of a modest 2-bedroom house in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood, attempting to flip pancakes while 7-year-old Emma Williams giggled at her clumsy technique. Flour dusted the countertops and batter splattered the stovetop, but the sound of Emma's laughter filled the space with more warmth than Victoria's penthouse had ever held. Miss Victoria, you're supposed to flip them when they bubble, not when they smoke, Emma advised, standing on a step stool beside her and wielding a spatula with far more expertise than a billionaire turned homemaker. I'm still learning, Victoria admitted, successfully turning a pancake that only looked slightly burnt around the edges. Your daddy makes it look so easy. Daddy makes everything look easy, Emma said with the confidence of a child who believed her father could fix anything. He says you're getting better at normal people stuff. Thomas emerged from the bedroom, adjusting his tie for his new job as Morrison Industries Director of Employee Relations, a position Victoria had created specifically for him before stepping down as CEO. The company was thriving under new leadership. The Patterson merger had been restructured to preserve jobs, and Marcus Webb was serving 18 months in federal prison. How are my favorite ladies doing with breakfast? Thomas asked, kissing Victoria's cheek and ruffling Emma's hair. We're doing great, Emma announced. Miss Victoria only burned the pancakes this time. Victoria had officially given up her CEO position and sold her controlling interest in Morrison Industries to the employees through an innovative, profit-sharing program. With her legal fees paid and her reputation restored, she discovered that losing most of her fortune had been the most liberating experience of her life. She bought this house, a fixer-upper that needed love more than money, and enrolled in art therapy classes to rediscover the watercolor painting she'd abandoned as a child. Her first painting, hanging on the refrigerator beside Emma's drawings, was a portrait of coffee spilling onto a Persian rug. She titled at the beginning, Daddy, are you going to marry Miss Victoria? Emma asked with the directness only children possess, causing both adults to freeze mid-motion. Thomas and Victoria exchanged glances across the kitchen. They'd been living together for 3 months, creating a family unit that worked despite its unconventional origins. Victoria had never been happier, and she could see in Thomas's eyes that he felt the same way. Would you like that, sweetheart? Thomas asked Emma gently. Yes, that Miss Victoria would be my real mom, and we'd be a proper family. Emma clapped her hands, sending flour flying. Plus, she promised to teach me how to be a businesswoman when I grow up. Victoria felt tears spring to her eyes, the good kind of tears she'd learned to recognize since Thomas had taught her the difference. Emma, would you really want me to be your mom? Even though I'm still learning how to make pancakes and braid hair. Moms are supposed to learn stuff with their kids, Emma said seriously. That's what makes them good moms. And you already love me, I can tell. I do love you, Victoria said, kneeling down to Emma's level. I love you both more than I ever loved any company or any amount of money. Thomas moved beside them, creating a circle of 3 that felt more complete than any boardroom Victoria had ever commanded. Victoria Morrison, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Will you marry a janitor who taught himself to love, a CEO who taught herself to be human? Yes, Victoria whispered. Then louder, yes, absolutely yes. Emma cheered and threw her flower-covered arms around both of them, creating a group hug that was messy and perfect and everything Victoria had never known she wanted. Later that evening, after Emma had fallen asleep between them during their family movie night, Thomas and Victoria sat on their front porch swing, watching the stars appear over Chicago's skyline. "Do you ever miss it?" Thomas asked quietly. "The power, the money, the control." Victoria considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the certainty of it. When you have enough money, you can solve almost any problem by throwing resources at it." She leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent of soap and contentment. "But I've learned that the best problems, like learning to love, or figuring out how to be a family, or making Emma laugh until she snorts, those can't be solved with money, so no regrets." Victoria looked through the window at Emma's drawing on the refrigerator, then at the engagement ring Thomas had surprised her with. Not a massive diamond, but his grandmother's simple gold band that carried stories of another love that had lasted decades. "No regrets," she said firmly. "The old Victoria Morrison built an empire, but this Victoria, your Victoria, is building a life, and I think a life is worth more than any empire." Thomas kissed the top of her head, and Victoria closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of their neighborhood settling into evening. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a child laughed, and life continued in all its messy, imperfect, beautiful glory. In 18 months, Victoria would give birth to their son, Thomas Jr. in 5 years. She published a children's book about a little girl who teaches her stepmother how to paint. In 20 years, she'd walk Emma down the aisle at her wedding. And in 30 years, she'd sit on the same porch swing with Thomas, watching their grandchildren play in the yard they planted together. But tonight, it was enough to sit here with a man who taught her that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones that can't be bought, can't be sold, and can't be taken away. Sometimes love really is enough.